りおしまい。
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Get the Mic, the only show where your hosts on the left, Owl,
and your host on the right, Brock,
dissect fiction for its mythological significance. On this episode, as usual, we're talking about Dragon Ball, episode 87 to be precise, which is called Showdown, Yamcha versus Tien Shenhan, or in the American, Yamcha versus Tien. So both of them say it's Yamcha versus Tien, even though that only happens in about the last 5 minutes of the episode.
Naturally.
Fair enough. Before we get started, please give us a like if you like what you hear. Subscribe to us. We have episodes that upload Mondays and Thursdays on YouTube and Tuesdays and Fridays on Rumble. We're also going to expand to some other platforms here very soon. Also, leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you have to say, whether you agree or disagree. We are interested to start that discussion. If you couldn't tell, we're very interested in the story of Dragon Ball.
Yeah, I'm always curious to hear what people have to say whenever. Well, first off, you tell them the Dragon Ball is a deep story.
Yes, it's interesting to try and gauge people's response. So, we'd love to hear from you. I think that's pretty much everything. Anything you had to say, Brock, housekeeping wise?
Nope.
All right, well, let's go ahead and start. So, episode 87 starts like this: as the competitors of the 22nd World Martial Arts Tournament line up ready to draw their lots in the final, there is more ill-spirited banter between the Crane and Turtle School. The episode kind of starts with Tien squaring off with Yamcha again, but it's just a quick banner this time. No, there's no like, I'm gonna fight you now, and then they stop them or anything like that. It's just a show, I think, too. Those
Yeah, he
simmering
calls it the Turtle Dance Club. So he's just trying to get a rise out of him, making fun of the Turtle School. Again, we're seeing that thing about Tien too, where he's taken his school of teaching and put it above the hierarchy, so that he just looks down on everyone else's, ability to be on his level because his school is better than any school could be.
Right. It's the idea of not subordinating one's spirit to the idea that other paths could possibly be the way.
Which is, I believe, a necessary part of the path to actually becoming better.
Sure. I agree, and I think that's going to actually play out here how we see it. Meanwhile, the Goku is looking for Roshi as usual, and Oolong decides to venture into the women's bathroom to find him, but to no avail. He gets slapped and thrown out, and eventually the Crane Hermit asks the Goku to allow him to look for the old master. Now, here I do want to mention this is an evolution of what we were saying last time about how when Roshi's able to be Jackie Chun, he's more integrated, such that he isn't as prone to the fallacies as Roshi normally would be. And so when Oolong goes and says, "I know where he is," he he was tempted too much by his flaws, and he's obviously going to be here in the woman's bathroom, right? And that's not the place he is at all. And he actually is doing what he needs to do on the path that he needs to do it.
Now, there's two ways to look at it, which I think is interesting, because before this, Roshi set up that he really needed to take a dump over, and so he said that while they were on the plane. Then Turtle called out, well, he's probably just taking a dump whenever he was taking a long time in the restaurant, and it became this thing so that he got mad and he was like, "Stop talking about what you're not supposed to say about me." It's a
Hmm.
turtle, and so Oolong could literally be like, "Oh, he's probably taking a dump," and goes into the bathroom because we don't see him decide to go into the women's specifically. We just see him go into the restroom, and then it
He
shows that
does
it's the
say,
women's
"Here we
afterward.
go," though.
Yeah,
Why would he say that if he was going into the men's bathroom? Here we go.
here we
Like,
go.
but another thing, and you pointed this out while we were watching it, it's funny that the three stalls in the women's bathroom, two of them are men.
That's what's really strange. There's a man eating, then there's a man counting money, and then there's finally a woman. So it is this weird thing where it's almost because it doesn't show us that he's gone into the women's restroom until afterwards. So it's just this confusing fake out. Um, which it's like I I tend to agree, yes, that he did it intentionally. I think that it was playing a trick on the viewer by not showing the reason that he came in here,
Fair,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And then
yeah.
it baits you with men in the stalls. Then it shows a woman, and then it shows that actually he went into the women's restroom.
It's a setup of a joke that actually expands on how Roshi's character is able to interact once he's on this level of existence, which is like this higher than normal, this elevated sense of existence in the Tenkaichi Budokai.
And then, of course, Bulma refuses to believe Oolong that it was an accident to go into the women's
Of
restroom.
course, yep, of
And he
course.
says, I seriously didn't mean to because I was too distracted by trying to find him,"
And
which
like
is
us, Bulma's a little wiser than that.
right.
And so, uh, I just wanted to mention that as well, that Roshi is where he should be.
It's funny though that
And so he's
either
not where
way,
he shouldn't be. I guess that's a good way to say it.
right, and it's also funny that either way he would be, by his own admission, taking a dump, or by what's not his admission, which is he has a moral weakness that he doesn't want to reveal, which would mean that he would be in the women's restroom instead of the men's restroom.
And by doing what is morally right in this case, being Jackie Chun for his students, he's able to kind of supersede those weaknesses entirely. And
By
that's
participating.
yes, and that's kind of what we were talking about in the last episode.
And that's what the crane hermit says to them about him later as well, right?
Hmm. Yeah, there it is. Here we go. So, one other thing I want to mention is the uh, interaction between Krillin and Chaozu. So we've seen them square off a couple times. I think 2 episodes ago we saw Chaozu make fun of Krillin's height, and Chaozu doesn't care that he's short. It's kind of that idea that Krillin is conscious of it and therefore he's hurt by it. Whereas Chaozu's not hurt by it, and so Krillin retaliating with look how short you are, or look how bald you are, right? Doesn't really have an effect, especially because in this we do see that Chaozu takes off his hat and he has one hair. And it's to say that he's one hair, let's say, above Krillin, and that is very upsetting to Krillin.
Well, Chaozu's spirit is that as long as I have one hair above you, I'm going to make fun of you. And
Yes.
that's tied into Tien. It's a
Mhm.
manifestation of the way that Tien is.
Yeah, as long as there's even a chance of the superiority, then it's going to be embodied in me against you.
Meaning, when I act out looking down on you or making fun of you, I am sincere because I truly believe that I am better than you.
And I actually literally have one hair while you have zero hairs, right?
Which Krillin says it's better to have no hair than one hair. And then he just says, "Are you jealous?"
Yes. He's such a troll. I do that's what I was saying. I did want to mention that. And then we do see a glimpse of Tien that we haven't really seen because
He's embarrassed by it.
he goes over and he covers Chaozu's head, and oh, he also calls him octopus, and I think that's a translation thing. I think octopus and bald must sound alike in Japanese or something.
Well, also it's like an octopus's round bald head,
Oh
right?
yeah, it could be. Either way, he does call him octopus to call instead of baldy,
Yeah.
but it's the same meaning. And so Tien covers his head, and in the dub, he says that he'll catch a cold, and he's blushing at the time. We've never seen that happen to Tien so far, and so it gives us some insight on
Well, he says it in the English, but in the original translation, he basically scolds him and says, "Hey, I told you not
knock it
to act
off,
like that."
Chaozu. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think that that's more telling of Tien, where he doesn't want it to be so transparent that that's how he thinks of people, right? He wants to, and we've seen this with his dishonesty in representing himself before. He wants there to be this facade of him being this, I don't want to say good, but having this, like, being principled, or
Being
or
disciplined and
being
in
disciplined.
control. Yeah.
And then, so whenever Chaozu kind of goes mask off or takes hat off and shows, my philosophy is that I have one hair above you, Tien says, "No, no, no. Like, I really am that much better. It's not just that." You know what I'm saying? Like, he's trying to show that it's not, the margin couldn't be that small.
I see where you're going with it. I didn't think of it like
That he
that, but
wouldn't act like that if the margin was that small. And Chaozu's revealing that he would act that way no matter how small the margin, as long as there is a perceptible one. So there's kind of a, he doesn't want to be revealed in that
well, it's an
sense.
it's an immaturity thing as well. If you notice how Tien makes fun of them, right? He calls them the dance club and things like
Hmm.
that, right?
Trivializes it.
He's not just like you guys are stupid or anything like that. And that's kind of what Chaozu's level of insulting is. He just says octopus. He just calls him octopus, and it makes Krillin mad. But what I was thinking, with him being embarrassed and covering up Chaozu here is it shows that even though they're in the same spirit of what they're doing. Tien doesn't want Chaozu to do that same thing because he knows it's bad. He does it, and he's embarrassed when he sees Chaozu do it. It's like a parent almost, right? Who will act a certain way, and if their kid acts that way, they'll be upset with the
Right.
kid.
Do as I say, not as I do, sort of thing.
And I think that's why he's embarrassed because he's able to actually see that with his third eye, and
And
he
he
kind
doesn't
of
act it out.
recognizes it. Yeah,
He
exactly.
willfully doesn't act it out, even though he knows that it shouldn't
And
be acted out
we're
that
gonna
way.
see more of that
I think that's
willful,
that's even better. Yeah, I think that's specifically why he does that.
and there's more willfulness to it that we see as Tien goes on through this tournament. And so that's, I think, where we'll move on. Oops. No. What am I doing? There we go. All right, so Roshi observes the room after we come back. I mean, the Crane Hermit. I do actually want to mention that really quickly. The Crane Hermit asks them to help, or tells them like, "I'll help you find Roshi," basically, and that's kind of where we leave off with that story. I just briefly want to mention that we can assume that the Crane Hermit's way of finding him will not be genuine.
Or it,
From how we've seen Tien and Chaozu act in this beginning, we're going to see that reflection, right? So
he's not doing for an altruistic purpose.
exactly.
It's
And
a self-serving thing that he's doing.
but I just want to mention that because that's going to come into play in just a bit. So Roshi back in the like kind of the waiting room area, Roshi observes that room as Jackie Chun, measuring each fighter and weighing in on the training that Crane Hermit has given to his students Tien and Chaozu. The announcer calls forth the fighters to draw their lots, just as Tien instructs Chaozu to rig the system to what they want it to be. So they kind of set up all of the pairings. During the drawing, Manwolf explains how he is unlike a wolf man. While Goku is astonished, the announcer knew his place even though he was last to pick. At last, the bracket is set up. Tien versus Yamcha, Manwolf versus Jackie Chun, Krillin versus Chaozu, and Pomput versus Goku. Couple things here. Roshi even says that it's a coincidence that they're not fighting each other, and it actually isn't. It's the idea that the antagonist actions drive the plot is kind of an old one, right? Usually you start off with the antagonist doing something that upsets the status quo, that has the hero go in a circle and and set the world right again by capturing the wisdom in the unknown, etc. Right, the hero's journey.
Right.
Um, and here we kind of see that the antagonists in this part have that ability to set the stage for how they want it to be. We also know, because of the way Chaozu and Tien have kind of subordinated themselves to hyper disciplined malice, that this here is almost a manifestation of that being able to decide the order in which these fights happen.
It is. So we had said before that Tien has taken the idea of his school and placed it above the hierarchy itself, and this is another manifestation of that as well,
Being able to manipulate,
where
right?
he thinks that he is above the fairness of this fight, right? He wants to get it over with and just declare himself the best. And so of course he would think that he's someone to decide. Whereas if somebody else in this tournament, such as Goku or Yamcha, had the ability to decide in such a way who the fighters were going to be, they wouldn't do it again because that's against the spirit of the rule, right? Rather than
Hmm.
the letter of the rule.
Yeah.
Whereas Tien he thinks it's a predetermined thing that he is the best, and so he just needs the letter of the rule for himself.
And not only that, but he wants to defeat Yamcha first because he thinks Yamcha is is the Turtle School's most powerful fighter, because he wants to demoralize, right? He's trying to destroy the spirits of these fighters, which is what he did with Nam in such a way, right? And so he sets up the
Demoralized
bracket
is a good way to put
to
it.
to exactly do that, to combat the way that they exist currently. And so they set up everything. And the last thing I do want to mention, not last thing, but another thing I want to mention is that Goku wants to pick his number, even though he should already know a process of elimination, right? That deductive reasoning is not something that one can learn just by walking around in the world, which is what Goku has done for the last 3 years. And so he doesn't know that he's number 8, even though 8 hasn't been drawn. He draws it and he's like, "Oh, wow, you're so smart. You got 8." And then Chaozu says to Tien, what's wrong with him wanting to choose his own number? We kind of get some insight into Chaozu and how Chaozu is an immature spirit, and almost that separate potential from Tien, that he kind of babies it, right? And that's why he looks like a baby, let's say.
And it's also manipulative of Tien to keep telling him this is what you need to do. Do this thing. And it sort of betrays this idea that Chaozu is not mature enough to understand the why it's wrong that he's doing what he's doing. It
Right, exactly.
but Tien does, and he's willfully having him do that anyway, right? Which is immediately opposite to what we saw outwardly how he acted, where he wanted to cover up Chaozu acting in the way that he acts, right?
Yes,
And so
exactly.
this is a further
Disintegration.
further disintegration in perceived how do I say status versus mode of being. It's he's basically able to push this off on somebody else and have them do it while showing that he knows that it's wrong for him to do it.
Yes. And those repercussions we'll see as we continue. I accidentally wrote Menwolf, by the way, which is pretty
Men
amazing.
Wolf,
Menwolf. So Manwolf is the next one I want to talk about
yeah.
specifically. So Manwolf and the Wolfman. So they call him the Wolfman. He gets all offended at it, and he's like, "I'm not a Wolfman. I'm a Manwolf. Turn into a human during the full moon." Right? And so it's interesting, that idea of having the white dot in the black paisley, right? The moon, that reflection of the sun, the enlightenment, being something that turns one into a more logos oriented figure, right? It's almost what it should be, because you would think that is what it would be if they were considering the moon as such. But with the negative aspect of the moon turning men into wolves, like the wolf man, right? It's seeing, let's say, the opportunities of chaos one way versus another. One is negative, one is positive, let's say.
Right. Well, it is interesting because the moon shines with the light from the sun, right? And it's only seeing the moon as the source of the light which turns men into beasts.
Hmm.
Seeing the light from the sun as what it is, and taking what should be taken away from the logos is what prevents men from being beasts. And so there's
And
this,
makes them men.
and it's a false equivalency to view the moon on the same level as the sun. But when you do, we see that it makes people more bestial, draws them into unconsciousness.
Hmm.
So setting it up in the opposite way here, there's something that needs to see the full moon to become human, to be controlled, to be under control again. This is the shadow of the decision that Roshi made
Destroying the moon.
in
Yes.
the last tournament when he destroyed the moon, because the moon is a cyclical thing as well. It's
And
resets,
it's not wholly negative.
right,
Right.
and so he has made it so that there is one fringe case out there of a person who's negatively afflicted by not having access to the concept of the moon, right? To that unconscious. In the
But who's
same
really
way,
just instantiated of all the problems that were created by it, which is that separation of beast and man that's no longer able to be bridged by the connection to the light
and it
of the
also
moon.
can't go back into being a man, meaning it's unbound, it's undefined, it's purely chaos now.
Yes.
And so by getting rid of that phase change, Roshi has locked the amount of chaos so that it can't be cycled back into order. And so we have to find the order again as a result of him creating a permanent sort of chaos there by getting rid of that satellite to the wisdom of the sun.
Precisely. And so we're going to see how Men Wolf stacks up in just a couple episodes. Um, one other thing here is that in the beginning, and I wrote this and we didn't stop on it at the time, but when Roshi is observing the room and he talks about how Crane has trained his students, he says they're such grim students because Goku's walking around on his hands, and he's over there by Yamcha who's telling a story, right? And Krillin's laughing, all this, right? They're having a good time, and then he looks over at Tien and Chiaotzu, and they're just like stone faced. They're not having fun with it at all. And so that idea of fun and play and the zone of proximal development, it clearly has not been instantiated in them. And so he comments about that. And it's a stark contrast between the schools that we see um, already apparent.
Now, I have a reason that I think that is, and sort of how it manifests in the difference between the teaching of the crane hermit and the teaching of the turtle hermit. And I think this isn't even necessarily just wholly my idea. I'm drawing this from a suggestion um, of relevance from our friend Chris Ombra. And he had mentioned that Tien did not receive the same kind of training from the Crane Hermit as, let's say, Goku and Yamcha and Krillin have from the Turtle Hermit because of the presence of Launch, who sees the blindness in Roshi and points it out in front of those who are training underneath him. I I think that ties into the fact that whenever the Crane Hermit creeps on Launch and she shoots at him, he catches all the bullets, meaning he's not someone who's going to allow himself to be shown for his faults in front of his students, and they take him too seriously, and as a result, take themselves too seriously.
Well, and I mean, I didn't want to get too into it because when we are talking about the philosophy of the schools later on, more specifically, it has to do with the experiences that Crane and Roshi have had together.
Right.
And
Well, yeah,
so
we'll definitely get to the bottom of that, but I think that
a good place to start.
this is a good place to set up how they tie into the Crane Hermit and why what they're doing now is the same as what the Crane Hermit is doing with the PA system.
Hmm. Yeah, I see. I see.
Demoralizing in that sense.
Demoralizing, yeah. And I do like that idea that Launch is kind of the linchpin because she is that thing that is necessary outside of Roshi for the boys to have a proper training to begin with.
To understand that it's not one single point, but it's more of a collaborative thing to create something that's the best. It doesn't just come from one thing. It's not the one ring, right?
Yeah, it's the way instead, right? It's the path that should be traveled on, and that nourishing motherly spirit that Launch can provide, right? Is
And being a judge,
essential. Right,
the
yes,
presence of
exactly.
that the judge of the feminine spirit is something that I don't think that like Tien and Chaozu have in their training from the Crane Hermit. It's very like
It's very
solidarity
ordered,
and a
dedicated,
single point of power.
disciplined, dedicated,
Yeah.
right? Very, and I mean, Tien is even modeled
And then so yeah,
after
so there's no
Chinese
joy in
monk.
this for them, right?
Yeah,
They don't see it as play. They don't see it as like a collaborative thing. They see it as getting something.
yeah, and that's because the way Crane, it's not the way, it's the end goal for Crane, right?
Exactly.
That we're gonna show up the turtle school, right? We'll be the
Yeah,
best on
journey
this.
versus destination, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where Goku and Yamcha and Krillin can find joy in the journey that they're on here because what's exciting to them is to be able to participate in it, not necessarily
As
just to
they
win
paid
it.
proper reverence to it, where Crane has introduced this thing as a way for them to show their dominance instead of um, what Roshi told them that they wouldn't win. They shouldn't expect to win. Crane has told his students that they are going to win.
Right. It's similar to when you see with parents these days who raise their kids to think that they're entitled to things or that they need to earn things, you know? And so there's a certain attitude that comes from that entitlement that is you take on a presumption that no one should take on, which is that you're automatically the best or that you automatically know everything and that the thing that other people know is not as important as what you know, which it should be the opposite, which is what Roshi's trying to instill in them as taking on that parental role for
Well,
them.
that's a good way to lead down a path to hell, right? By saying that you're the one that knows everything. Let's say I think that's pretty much what Lucifer was at
Right.
when he was trying to use like I know everything by using reason. I can know everything that I need to know. Not true necessarily. So, yeah, I like that. I think that's a good way to end up that section. And so the last thing we see here is just as the first match of the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai is about to start, Crane Hermit requests that the PA system call out for
Herman
Roshi in
Crane.
an especially insulting way. And so, oh my gosh.
Herman Crane.
Yes. Okay, so he calls him like 300 years old, looks like a turtle, things like that. Like, just a demoralizing way, right? Calling out the inherent flaws in Roshi
Right, he's
almost.
wanting to show the blindness of the father
Yes.
to
It's almost
demoralize
pointing
people.
at the nakedness of the father and
Yes.
saying point and look everyone, right?
Yeah, this is exactly that. He sees his opportunity to do that. And so they say, "Where's Roshi?" And he says to them, "Okay, well," or they say, "Why would you say those things about Roshi?" And he says, "Can you tell me a good thing about Roshi?" And he
And
challenges them,
Oolong cannot.
and Oolong can't do it. And then I believe Launch calls him out for it and says,
Yeah.
"Oolong." Blue Launch calls him out, right?
Yeah, Blue Launch is here now.
And this is the wisdom in Blue Launch.
Yes.
That though there is nakedness in the father, there should be a reverence for the fatherly spirit or for the masculine spirit anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And so she calls him out for it, and even a decrepit old pervert. And even Goku says, "Sounds like Master," right? Like it is inherent that those things are part of Roshi, but those aren't the things that define who Roshi is. And the very at the very point that Roshi doesn't retaliate against Crane here shows that he's more integrated than he's been in a while, right? Because he yells with Crane in the very beginning. We saw in Rivals, and Arrivals, our thumbnail for it is them yelling at each other, right?
It causes him to have a an outburst,
Yeah.
but
And,
that's it.
and that's it. And so he's able to move on from it because he's on a path that can't be stopped by this demoralization that Crane is trying to spew.
But this is why Crane is trying to spew this because this is how this spirit wins ultimately, right?
It's the only way is the demoralization, right? And the yeah, the demoralization and the bludgeoning of order and discipline in a focused malicious way. But yeah, that's the modus that they're going with. And so the last banter between Tien and Yamcha is especially nasty. They're like, "We're gonna beat each other up. I'm gonna beat you up, and then I'm gonna beat you up." And that even
We'll
happens
settle
before the
this in the
fight.
ring.
We'll settle this in the ring. And so the match begins, and they don't even start fighting. They do more banter. They're like, "Well, I'm gonna show you up. I'll beat you soon enough." And then they actually start fighting. And so the fighting begins, and Tien and Yamcha seem evenly matched.
It's a great fight.
Even Goku comments how strong they both are. However, the episode ends with Yamcha ready to unleash his latest technique. And so yeah, very well choreographed, and it shows too that Yamcha's ability to subordinate himself has matured him to a level that can actually contend with the challenges in the world that even Goku contends with. And so he's come a long way already just from his fight with the mummy.
Yeah, he surprises Tien right off the bat, and Tien has to admit it to himself because that's Tien's way. He can't just say it's a fluke. A
Well,
lot
he
of
can see.
yeah,
He can see.
see a lot of rival types or I would say
Gary
malicious
Oak.
fighters. They would say, "Oh well, you got lucky," or they would say
Yeah.
something along the lines of, "There's no way. It must be a fault with me." We've seen that happen, right? But in this case,
Like the Devil Man.
exactly. But in this case, he has to see that he was wrong about Yamcha and admit it to himself.
About him being maybe not weaker than him, but weak in general, yes. And so Goku even comments how strong they both are, and Goku's usually a pretty good judge of it because if you'll hear Krillin be astounded by anything basically that happens in
A
the
lot of the
ring.
time, Goku's like, "Oh, you think so?"
Yeah, and like Krillin's like, "Oh, it's amazing." He's like, Goku's like, "Oh, well, they're both good fighters," and so we get to see how evenly matched they really are. And so his latest technique is the Wild Refufu Ken or something
Or like
like that.
Wolf Fang, Gale
Gale or
Fist, or
something like that,
something.
and
The
so
Super
we'll
Wolf
see
Fang
that next
Fist.
time, but really it ends with that well choreographed scene. We see how evenly matched they are, and we see that
I do want to point
initial.
out the audio, the
Oh,
song
yes, the song.
in the original
A
in the
song
Japanese
for
audio.
Yamcha, literally Yamcha
The lyrics
song.
are all about Yamcha and how he's progressed now.
The lonely wolf into the sky, right? It's that idea that he's projected himself into the Logos and inhabited himself in the island, Roshi, that's surrounded by the unknown, right? And by doing so, he's now able, like I said, to contend with Tien. And so
It's a
that's
really hype moment for Yamcha, honestly.
one of
This
his
is the
highest.
Yamcha that people in Z have never seen.
Yes, definitely. And it says, and Tien Shan is every bit of the Turtle Hermits equal. They introduce both the houses, the rivalry, all that's introduced, and the stakes are laid on the line for next episode because this is where the episode ends.
And now it starts to really get good.
Yes, it's gonna. I mean, I've already been enjoying these episodes.
It's
a lot,
good,
so
but
but it's gonna get
heat up.
even better, even better, even better than the filler. Even though you guys seem to enjoy the filler a lot. Anyways, I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah.
If you liked what you heard, please give us a like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. We upload videos Mondays and Thursdays on YouTube, Tuesdays and Fridays on Rumble. So give us a subscribe. We're gonna add our new socials very soon. I'm your host on the left, Owl.
I'm your host on the right, Brock.
And we hope you guys have a good night.